Thank you.
All right. Press outfit. Are y'all ready? Y'all ready?
I didn't know whether we're shooting, whether we're talking. What are we doing?
This is our last interview of the con, so we're going to save the best for the last with Mr. Steve Whitmire.
I'll take the compliment. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who would like the first question? Mr. Allen, I'll let you start off.
Oh my God, I feel bad. Hi, my name is Alan.
Hello, Alan. How are you?
Good. So I was wondering, like, how did you feel when you found out that Kermit the Frog would become an international meme with the drinking tea?
Oh, with the tea, with Lipton
Yes,
tea.
yeah.
Yeah, so we did these bits for Lipton, these commercials with Kermit about drinking more tea. Be more tea, I believe was the slogan.
Okay.
You know, you never know what's going to happen when an ad campaign like that comes around. So to me, what was always important is, does it suit the character? You know, Kermit has a very definite personality, so you want to know if it's going to work. And it actually was a really good fit. And I think a lot of that had to do with the song that he sung, this Be More Tea song where he played the banjo. And I think it suited him very well. We had a lot of fun doing those. This may be more information than anyone cares about, but from a puppeteer standpoint, we did something we'd never done before, which is Kermit was picking his banjo rather than just strumming his banjo. That's a little detail, but those details are really important to us. Whenever we did musical numbers, we always tried to make that instrumentation accurate. So we had this little thing, and his fingers didn't actually work. We were just moving them in such a way that it looked like he was picking. So anyway, puppeteer thing, but lots of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Next question, Mr. Adrian.
Yes, so I know that you guys have had work outside of Sesame Street and everything. What is your favorite franchise that you have worked on? I know that Nintendo had a moment where they worked with Star Fox and they used some of the puppeteering from that. But I wanted to get your take on what was your favorite experience outside of, you know, things that you typically work on.
Well, let me think about that for a second. Honestly, to tell you the truth, over the years, most of the work I've done, almost all of the work I've done that I've been involved in was Muppets itself. My interest was always the puppetry, doing characters like that. I'm trying to think of something that I've worked on outside of that, and I'm thinking, what have I done? I can't think of anything. My favorite part of that has always been the live appearances that we did. It's a funny thing, you know. We always treat these characters like they are real living individuals, and they have real deep personalities, and you know, we all know what they are. And a lot of times the people who are fans don't know the detail that all of us went through kind of as actors to develop these characters. I'm not exactly answering your question. I'm trying.
No, it's fine. It's
I'm also not trying not to avoid it, but I honestly, most of the work I've done over the years has always been with the Muppets, and it's pretty much always been as a performer. So I can't think of anything I've done outside of that. If I do something, I'll let you know. Okay, there's still
Any
time.
Dark Crystal?
What's that?
Dark Crystal?
Well, yes, that's true. It's not the typical Muppets. Dark Crystal was different than the typical Muppets. It was still the same basics in a way. It was still, you know, practical puppetry, just bigger and heavier and more uncomfortable. You know?
Next question. Rebecca, did you have one?
Sure. Okay. So I know that you also do a live broadcasting program called Call In. And
Yes.
I wanted you to, you know, talk about that a little bit more.
Sure, I can talk a bit about Cave-In. I had this.
Sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay. I had this idea. About 3 or 4 years ago, that it would be fun to come up with a character that was really suited to a puppet character that would do something specifically for the internet. And one of my favorite things of all times is whenever we do unscripted stuff. You know, we go on the Today Show or one of those kind of talk shows, and when the characters have no script and we just play and have fun with the host or whoever. So years ago, I started out in Atlanta when I was in high school doing puppetry, and I did a local TV show where the point was that I was on the air for 2.5 hours every day live with a puppet, not me, just a puppet, taking phone calls. And I loved it. I loved it then, and I've loved it all the way through my Muppet career. So we decided to do something that would work in the same sort of way through the internet. So basically this show is called Cave-In with Weldon the IT guy, and Weldon the IT stands for Internet Troll. And so he actually is physically a troll. He lives in a cave all by himself, and at the last Friday night of every month, he supposedly hacks into YouTube, and people can call him and talk to him. And what he wants to know is your most miserable life experiences, because he's in trouble. So people call in. Sometimes they actually really are miserable life experiences. Sometimes they're made up. But all the calls are real people calling in via Discord, and we broadcast on YouTube. And then we do these very Muppet-like 2 to 5 minute production numbers in the middle. There's songs and skits, a lot of parodies on real things, like we did a Stranger Things one called Stronger Thongs. We recently did one of Law and Order called Law and Odor. And Weldon is the only character, he's the only puppet. So Weldon plays all the roles. He calls himself a cosplayer. Well, he actually calls himself a cosplayer. And he says it's because he likes to dress up in silly outfits. So, and I'm doing all the puppetry, and I edit the thing, I do all the music. It's really a one-man show, except for the person who helps me with the tech. So anyway, it's been great fun. We've been doing that for about 3 years, and I'm going to keep it going at least a little bit longer. And then I may try to move Weldon into doing some other things.
Mr. Kim?
All the characters that you voiced and acted, which one reflects your personality and how?
That's interesting. You know, they all do to some degree. There are certain Muppet characters I did over the years that were sort of my original characters, and then there's a handful of them that I inherited. Like when Jim Henson passed away, I began to do Kermit and Ernie on Sesame Street and several others that, you know, other puppeteers had done in the past. But really with the Muppets, that never happens, except in the event where we lose a puppeteer. Once a person began to work with Jim Henson, they really had a job for life as far as he was concerned. So there's an aspect of those characters, and those characters too. The ones I guess that I've originated that were probably aspects of me are a little guy named Rizzo the Rat that I did for 40-something years. And Rizzo grew, you know, as I grew. You know, he got up to be a better character as I got older, more experienced. And then we did a show called Fraggle Rock for many years. I did a character named Wimbley the Fraggle, and this dog on there named Sprocket, who actually didn't speak, he just made dog noises. But it was as though he was speaking, he was practically talking. Wimbley was very reflective of me at the time, because I was 23 years old. I was really just getting started doing this as a career. And this, I don't know whether you know this character, but he did what became known as wimbling. He could not make up his mind. He would wimble back and forth. He never made up his mind. And that was pretty much who I was at 23, you know. So they all come directly out of the performer who does them.
So pretty much each stage of your life, each one reflects that stage of your life.
Well, I think so. And one of the things I learned, you know, there was one of our main puppeteers was a gentleman, he passed away a few years ago, named Jerry Nelson with the Muppets for decades and decades. And Jerry was an incredible character actor who happened to do that with puppets. And one of the things I learned from Jerry is that, for one thing, as you get older, you get more confident in doing ridiculous characters that somehow manage to be funny, maybe just because you're getting older. I don't know. They may not have been funny if you did them when you were 20. I don't know. But Jerry was an incredible voice person. But in many cases, he barely altered his own voice in order to come up with a completely different character. And I was never comfortable with that when I was young. I thought it had to be some extreme change of my voice, but that doesn't always have to be the case, you know.
I have a question for you, sir.
Yeah.
So you mentioned growing up in Atlanta, and did you start off your career at the Center for Puppetry Arts? A lot of people don't realize that it's the third largest puppetry theater or whatever in the whole world. That's where most people train, from what I understood. But could you speak a little to how you got started in your involvement with them?
Sure. Well, I never worked there at the Puppetry Center.
I've interviewed 3 times and never hired me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I never actually worked at the Center for Puppetry Arts, but I knew everyone who was involved. And I knew them actually prior to the center. Vince Anthony, who was the major force behind the place for years, along with his team. I've known him since the mid-'70s, long before there was a Center for Puppetry Arts. I'm not even thinking there was a plan for one then. And then I was, it was the same year that I joined the Muppets in 1978 that the center opened. And the funny part of that was that I had just joined the Muppets. We were off doing the Muppet movie in California, the original one. And I'm a young kid, I'm like 19. And Atlanta is my hometown. They opened this giant center for puppetry. I wasn't able to be here, but Jim flew to Atlanta to open the center with Kermit, because he was Kermit at the time. So I was not able to be here. But over the years, I've always tried to help any way I could to support them in terms of doing fundraisers and things like that. During my time with the Muppets, we would always try to have Kermit here for their big fundraisers and stuff like that. I think it's an incredible place. I've always kind of been in awe of, particularly events when he was there, that to keep this nonprofit going, and to, you know, it takes a lot of money to do that, which they have to raise. He was always very, very good at that. But it's an amazing place, the museums and the live theater that they do, all those sorts of things. Oh, wait.
Yes, Miss Georgia.
So in regards to how you were speaking on basically the characters and them all having personalities, when it comes to developing a Muppet or a new character's personality, what do you kind of go for? Do you go for more what would connect to audiences, or do you go more for what connects to you and kind of present that to an audience?
You know, I think we've always sort of had to go with what connected to us to make it seem real. You know, otherwise, if we didn't identify with it ourselves, then it would never connect with the audience. And so many of those I would call them the core Muppet characters, the older characters, even though sometimes these days it's new performers doing it, it still sort of relies on that original character. Like Jim Henson was Kermit when he was alive, and then I did it for 30 years. And really the only way I was able to do that was to keep it based on Jim's original. I was lucky enough to work with him for about 12 years, and so I knew him, and I knew the parts of him that he put into Kermit. So I kind of worked off of that. But at the same time, you don't just want it to stay a copy, otherwise it gets very stale. You know, you need it to continue to grow. So it really has to come from the performer. And one thing I learned very early with the Muppets in particular, because whoever does a certain character does it forever, I mean, essentially, that when you see the Muppets, if you relate to the Muppets, you really are relating to the puppeteer, you know, because they are the voice and the character, you know, and they're really the most common thing that goes to the characters no matter where they end up. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Adrian.
So over the years, you've had so many different performances with the Muppets. What is your favorite skit out of all the ones?
Favorite, like, skit we did, the favorite piece?
Yes.
Well, my favorite show of all time, series, was Fraggle Rock. And there's a few of our particular, like, musical numbers and things that we did in that show that were pretty amazing. To me, personally, because, well, for instance, we did one whole episode called Scared Silly. And it was Wembley Fraggle, this character I did, and Boober, another character, scaring each other. So Boober would jump out from behind a rock and scare Wembley. And every time Wembley would try to scare Boober, it wouldn't work. And he was so frustrated that he couldn't scare him back. The reason that show got written is because Dave, who plays Boober, and me were doing that in real life. We were like lurking around the studio, jumping out from behind things and startling each other. We always played practical jokes on each other. It was part of what made the fun during our shooting. You know, everybody's being silly and playing around. So sometimes those ideas would end up being written into shows with the characters, you know. So I'd say that's really a favorite. If you can find that on the internet. It's out on YouTube called Scared Silly.
Okay. Does someone? I have a question, but I'm gonna let Mr. Keith. No, you
Yeah.
want me to do
You can
it?
go ahead first.
Are you sure?
Ladies first.
Okay. So my favorite Muppet couple is Gonzo and Camilla.
Yeah.
Could you speak to who your favorite Muppet couple is and why?
Wow. Well, I will tell you quickly one thing about Gonzo and Camilla. Something that we never did with Rizzo and Gonzo that I always wanted to do was have them share an apartment. I thought they should just be a couple, like the Odd Couple. And I wanted Rizzo to be, if it was the Odd Couple, I wanted him to be the super neat one because he's a rat and you wouldn't expect it. And Gonzo is the sloppy guy who's just all over the place. If you know the characters, it kind of works. And I always wanted Rizzo to be upset because, you know, it's not that bad living with Gonzo, but there are feathers everywhere. You know, all those feathers, I hate those feathers. Favorite Muppet couple? Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, it would be obvious to say Kermit and Piggy. I'm not sure that's true necessarily, but actually more Muppet duos than Muppet couples. I always liked Floyd and Janice together from Duck Cheap Band. You know, they made a lot of sense to me in a weird way. But there are a lot of pairings of Muppets that mostly reflect pairings of the puppeteers who were doing it as sort of comedic duos.
Right.
You know, like Ernie and Bert, and Kermit and Fozzie, and, you know, Richard Hunt and Jerry Nelson did a bunch of them. They did this character called the Two-Headed Monster on Sesame Street, if you've ever seen that. It was these two guys. They did, and they were also Floyd and Janice. So a lot of times those kind of things worked into who the puppet pairings were.
Do we have a chance, Mr. Key, to do your last question?
Last one, what's your favorite voice line that you ever did?
For me,
Yeah, your favorite.
oh my goodness, that's a tough one. You mean like favorite piece of dialogue?
Yeah, dialogue. Or,
Well, I can tell you the one that everybody seems to identify with is one that Rizzo did in. Now I got to remember whether it was Muppet Christmas Carol or Muppet Treasure Island, but you guys might know it, where he says, "Light the lamp, not the rat. Light the lamp, not the rat." he was holding something up next to a lamp, like a lamp, and Gonzo lights his tail instead of the lamp. Those two movies look so much alike. I
It's
can't remember which
from
one it was.
Christmas Carol.
It was Christmas Carol, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies. I mean, that was my first real. First performance as Kermit after Jim passed away, so it was a hard thing to do because I knew we were all thinking about Jim the whole time. But it kind of let us know that the Muppets could go on for a while. You know.